stakeholder and artist coordinator at Eastside Art Society. And today I'm going to be moderating our second Talking Art panel. Before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge that we are holding this event on the traditional, unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I'm truly grateful to gather on these lands and waters, and I intend to work from a place of respect and responsibility to this gift. For those of you who are new, Talking Art is a 3-part artist talk series that the Eastside Art Society presents in advance of the Eastside Culture Crawl. It's a great opportunity to learn more about artists and their process more deeply. This year's crawl will be happening from November 14th to November 17th, where over 500 artists will be opening up their studios to the public. The Eastside Culture Crawl is taking place in the Eastside Arts District, which houses the highest per capita concentration of artists in all of Canada. Something I particularly find extremely exciting and interesting. Mark your calendar and head to www.culturecrawl.ca to explore this year's artist work, as well as the other events leading up to this year's Culture Crawl, including our annual preview exhibition, which will be showing over 90 artists across 4 venues at Pendulum, Strange Fellows, Alternative Creations, and The Culture. Join us for our opening reception on November 7th from 6 to 8 p.m. at all venue locations. The theme of today's talk is collaboration, craft, and the art of cross-disciplinary creation. Together, our panel of artists will engage in a discussion on how collaboration and experimentation with mediums inspires innovation in their work. For our discussion, I'm going to be asking each of our artists 3 questions. And if you have any questions of your own during this discussion, please put them in our Q&A chat for our question period at the end of the talk. I'm really excited to introduce our artists today who are here to help us explore the topic. First, I would like to introduce Tara Lee Bennett. Tara is a paper artist and sculptor who lives and works in Vancouver, BC. Originally from Zimbabwe, Bennett lived in Australia for several years, where she attended the Enmore Design Centre in Sydney, Australia. She established her practice in the historic 1000 Parker Street building in 2019. Her current series is infused with images of growth and renewal, reflecting both the personal and professional journeys of her life. We also have with us this evening Hope Forstenzer. I hope I said that right.
You did.
Hope is a native New Yorker who worked in film, theater, and ceramics before falling in love with glass. She's lived in Vancouver since 2012 and is a proud member of the Terminal City Glass Co-op, where she works and teaches, and founded the Learning Fire program. She's shown at the Canadian Clay and Glass Gallery and the Art Gallery of Burlington in Ontario, as well as a gallery in Seattle, Seymour Art Gallery in North Vancouver, the Craft Council of British Columbia Gallery in Vancouver, Pomo Arts in Port Moody, among other locations. Her work sells at CCBC Shop on Granville Island. We also have with us today Tristesse Seeliger, working on my pronunciations. Tristesse is a Canadian artist and educator whose multidisciplinary practice primarily encompasses painting, murals, and collage. She earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from Emily Carr University of Art and Design and acquired her teaching certificate from Simon Fraser University. Her artistic endeavors center on exploration of mapping as a tool for perception and orientation, delving into associated ideas and metaphors. She's collaborated with many clients, including Emily Carr University, the City of Richmond, the City of Vancouver, in over 7 murals. Her works spanning paintings, collages, sculptures, and murals have been showcased in both solo and group exhibitions across Canada and the US. Presently, she's located at Arts Factory in Vancouver, while also serving as an educator in the art and as an art educator for the Vancouver School Board. To get us started in our conversation, I would love to learn a little bit more about each of the artists and more deeply their creative process. Tara, could I start with you? Would you mind introducing our audience to your body of work and your process?
Yeah, for sure. I'm so thrilled to be here with everyone tonight. There's not much else going on, so it's good that we're all here, right? Thinking about that.
We'd be so bored. Yeah.
No biggie. So I like to say that I create a world in paper with my work. So I meticulously draw, cut, and assemble tiny pieces of paper into elaborate and intricate creations. So like you said, I was born in Zimbabwe, and then I studied graphic design and illustration in Sydney, and now I work out of 1000 Parker Street Studios, which is where I am right now, and it's like a second home to me. So my first job after being a student was a graphic designer for textile prints, and that was in Australia. So it was a lot of swimsuit designs. I don't really know if there's a connection with what I do now, but I really like that rather than working digitally, I work with my hands. To see something move from inside of my head and into a physical form is deeply satisfying to me. So I like to think of my works as gardens of my own creation. So some of the florals are modeled after real species, some are not. And the series is about, more than just stems and petals. It's about lushness and beauty and abundance. So I hide things in it and I layer tiny petals and leaves and flowers on top of each other. So it's really all about more beauty, more lushness, more, just more. And I like to infuse it with images of growth and renewal.
That's gorgeous. Just putting it out
Thank
there.
you. So this is like the
Beautiful.
collaborative pieces that I guess I'll be talking about. And right now in my work, I'm kind of thinking about the impossible. What would an impossible work look like? So I work with paper, and it's easily accessible, and it's a simple, humble material, but it's also transformative and has endless possibilities. So while my monochromatic textured creations depict flowers, they have almost no color at all. So I work exclusively in white, black, and now a little gray paper. And I think taking out the color actually adds more to the adventure of discovery in my work. And by kind of harnessing a monochromatic aesthetic, I think it highlights the delicacy of my cuts. And I love what lurks in the shadows. When we explore shadows, we also explore light, of course. And the main question I get asked at the crawl is, how long does it take you to do that? So sometimes I'll spend a whole day constructing a single flower. And then it really just depends on the size and the intricacy of the ultimate artwork. A piece can take anywhere from a couple of weeks to a few months. So a little background on what I do and kind of how I do it.
Well, it's stunning. I mean, the level of detail, the intricacy of the work. I think what you said about it being monochromatic, really showing that level of detail, like for me makes a lot of sense. I always think in fashion, as someone who loves clothes, the silhouette, it is often when you have a good silhouette, you can get away with that monochromatic palette. And I feel like the intricate form of your work really, really speaks to that as well. It's so lovely. And we'll get to learn more about it soon. Hope, why don't I throw the question to you? If we could get
Yes.
to know a little bit more about your creative process and your body of work, would you mind sharing with us a little bit about that?
I would love to. Tara, first of all, those are stunning. Just want to point that out. I started off doing photography, writing stories, and eventually went to film school. I got a BFA in film, and then ended up doing multimedia theater in New York for about 10 years, and then kind of burnt out, and then started doing ceramics, and then got bored and started blowing glass. And it was like being struck by lightning. Within like 18 months, I had sold everything I owned and moved to Seattle. So it got very intense, my relationship with glass, very quickly. But I worked as a graphic designer as sort of my day job for many years. And one of the things, I taught it at Emily Carr, I've taught it at other places, and I think one of the things I really was working to do from the minute I started working with glass was, how do I bring that graphic design aesthetic and that design aesthetic, and also photography and motion, into the work that I want to make with glass. So once I had sort of played with the material enough to be able to do things with it, I immediately started trying to put images on it. And I do that through a series of ways in which I put images or transfer images onto glass. And this is actually two different ways here. One is actual photosensitive glass, and another is sand carving the glass using film. And a lot of the images here were originally photographs that I messed around with in Illustrator and Photoshop, or both, in order to get them to do what I want them to do on the glass. So it's got a little bit of a kind of a wild image experiment thing going on all the time, and playing with that. Glass is such an unusual medium to work in, and what has always attracted me to it and kept me focused on it over such a long period of time now, it's been, going on 20 years, is that it really has this incredible capacity for both light and opacity. And these are details of two different pieces, the one we saw before and the one we'll see next. And the close-up there is of actual photosensitive glass, which is a lot of fun to play with. But it has this combination of light and opacity. It's got motion in it, even when it's still. And it has sort of, for me, sort of a almost a primal kind of medium, with the amount of heat and the changing of the material as you work with it. That's really always been very inviting. And I've always really enjoyed playing with what glass was capable of doing, and what I was capable of coming up with trying to make it do. So, I spent a lot of time teaching people to blow glass, and that continues to inspire me to do it more, and it makes me fall in love with it all over again. And I've branched out now, as you can see, into both fusing, which is happening in the piece on the right. That's some fused glass. And in the very first piece, those are blown pieces that are then put into a copper foil stained glass scenario. And so I've been sort of trying to figure out all the different ways I can take different glass processes and just sort of meld them to create sort of a feeling of again, light, opacity, motion, and emotion, sort of trying to convey sort of intense emotional states, and sort of a real feeling of being sort of involved or diving into the sculpture. So what I want for people when they see it is that, to sort of dive into it. So, and I really haven't even, right now I'm working on a whole series of fused panels that are going to end up part of a cabinet. So it's like I'm continuing to take glass and play with it as much as I can.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm so curious about this photosensitive glass. Sorry.
Yeah.
How does
No,
that,
go
is
ahead.
that different than working with regular glass?
A little bit. It was the sort of a mad scientist creation of a guy who had been a chemist at Corning, and then went on to sort of start a company that made glass color. And you buy it in sort of bar form, and then you sort of apply it to whatever you're making, and then you expose it using a certain kind of ultraviolet light, and then heat it up, and the image sort of develops. It acts like photo paper.
Okay, so sort of like cyanotype?
A little bit, but a little bit more. Yes, you can put it out in the sun, and if you have enough sun in the right direction, you can develop it in that way. Yeah. So it has a sort of a similar quality, and you then need to sort of bring it up to a certain temperature. I think it's around 525 degrees Celsius in a kiln, and it then the image will appear.
Right. I think it's so interesting. I feel like you talked a lot about like fun and play in your work and experimenting, which I personally, that's what I love about creating. I'm curious, like now being an educator, you work with kids, like has that impacted your creative process at all and how you approach making things?
It definitely has. I think one of the really cool thing about working with teenagers, because it's not kids, it's teens, because we can't have anyone under 16 in our hot shop, but we are expanding a little bit to flame working and fusing with that program as well. What's really interesting to me about it is teaching it to teenagers reminds me of what glass brings to it as a process when you're working on it. It's teamwork and improvisation and problem solving and thinking on your feet and being like, oh, that didn't work, let's try that again. And it's like there's a lot of understanding that there's room to mess up. And that is something that the more that I try and impart that onto the teenagers who want to be able to, high school students who want to get better at it sooner, to be able to remind them that there's room to mess up reminds me that there's room to mess up, which is good, because if I don't remind myself of that, I mess up and feel bad.
It's hard. It's humbling sometimes, right?
It's very
Creating
humbling.
So many failures before the success often.
Yeah,
that goes unrecognized.
What I tell the students, any students that I teach, whether they're adults or teens, is I operate by failure. I mess around and try and get the thing in my head out of the glass, and then it doesn't work and I figure out why, and I go back and I try it again. And that is humbling, but it's also very satisfying when you can get it across the line to the point where the thing you're thinking is something that you can actually create.
The tangibleness of it, that you can
be like, I came up with this, I sketched it on a piece of paper, and I figured out 6 different processes, and the first 4 didn't work, and the last 2 got me to where I wanted to go. And that's really, so it's also like a relief. You're like, oh, thank goodness. Like, how many times was I gonna have to try to do that?
No, totally.
It would have been a lot. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Hope. Tristesse, I would love to hear from you. Could you tell us a little bit about your creative process?
Sure. I think I've done quite a few things in the last 12 years. So, but I kind of wanted to focus on for this talk, I wanted to focus on bringing weaving into my work. In the past, I have been working with collage and painting and sculpture and murals, but my focus of the past year has been bringing weaving into the work, and this is some of it behind me here. So I'm just starting to explore what it means to bring weaving into my paintings, and I'm incredibly excited by the potential here and know there's a kind of world of discovery ahead for me. I've been sort of interested in creating the canvas and having the canvas be a part of the work. I really am excited about adding sort of another tool to my toolkit and pushing myself into kind of new territory. And that's kind of what my art practice has been about so far. So the latest body of work combines this new to me artistic medium of weaving with my current art practice of painting. I spent 5 months this past year studying weaving with my mother-in-law, Sandra Crompton, and she's a master weaver. And as well as kind of studying online with Jane Stafford, which is, she has an online weaving guild, and it's incredible. So I was motivated to learn as I had an artist residency this past July in Joshua Tree at AZ West, which is Andrea Zitel's art residency there. So I've been enamored with Gunta Stoltz, Annie Albers, and a lot of the Bauhaus weavers for quite a while. And I would often look at their work to inspire my painting. So I looked at their color palettes, and I just loved what they did. And my mother-in-law has been giving me beautiful textiles every year at Christmas. And so uh, I was, really enjoying this artwork that she was making that has like all this practical kind of connotation and craft connotation, but is stunning works of art. And so I was, really thinking about what makes this textile, craft, and what makes my art, and the kind of there's a kind of dissonance there for me, because obviously I value both those things quite a bit. So the learning curve with this weaving has been really steep, and it's really front loaded in terms of just getting started. I think weaving is a whole artistic world of its own, with incredible practitioners doing all, kinds of amazing work. I've spent hours learning about how to wind a warp, dress a loom, create basic weave patterns, and mix colors. And I'm just really getting started. I have absolute respect for this medium. I want to continue to learn and push my technique and skills in this area. And the work I'm showing at the crawl this year is 8 of my new weaving paintings. And I've really tried to bring the beauty of weaving into my paintings. So it uses the canvas and exposes the canvas and interplays the painting and the canvas colors. And that's kind of the goal I set out to do this year. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Fantastic. It's so interesting, and I love how everything comes together and plays together. When you look at it, it looks so seamless, but I'm sure it probably didn't always feel that way, and it took a lot of work to get to that place. I'm curious if for yourself, like learning weaving, has it changed at all the way that you've approached painting? Because as something you've done for many years, and that process for you?
Yeah, I feel like well, yeah, I mean, definitely there's been that I think that's what's exciting about learning something that's this new, is that because you're learning how to incorporate what you've been doing with this other thing. Yeah, it's definitely they're definitely affecting each other. What was your question again?
Just if it's changed at all the way that you paint,
Oh,
in any way.
well, completely, because completely in certain regard, because I'm exposing, I'm leaving the canvas. The canvas is part of the project. So I'm trying to highlight it. So I'm sort of disappearing parts of the canvas. Like, I'm also really trying with these paintings to disrupt the grid. So weaving is such a grid formed art form, as far as I know. So far, as much as I know in my, my limited knowledge of weaving. And so these paintings are quite gestural. And I'm trying to use the colors of the grid that I have underneath in the canvas to sort of speak to these like gestures. So yeah, it's sort of disrupting the grid. It's one of the guiding principles of these paintings.
Have you heard of an artist named Lori Wohl, W-O-H-L? Are you familiar with her at all?
Oh.
She works out of the US. She literally cuts her canvases up and unstrings them and reweaves them, so that what she's making is part woven, part canvas, using the actual canvas material. It's really quite crazy.
Yeah, I'm sure,
Yeah,
like
it's
lots of people doing really cool stuff.
Yeah, she's like deconstructs the canvas and then reweaves the fibers as part of the painting. Crazy awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really great about doing a sort of series, like I did 8, is that now I have you know, it's developed a couple of ideas and, you know, where I might want to go next. And there's a lot of places that I could go now with this. And it's now just sort of centering myself and sort of choosing one direction, then really exploring that.
Nice.
Right. Fantastic. Well, that kind of is, I feel like, a really great segue to what I thought we could chat a little bit about next. And that's the insights and innovation that come with experimenting. When you risk it, often you'll get rewarded in really creative dividends. So Tara, I thought we could come back to you and chat just a little bit about, I know you haven't experimented with a new medium per se yourself, but instead you've done this through your collaboration with Kari. I'm wondering if you could share for us a little bit more about how experimenting by how collaborating with Kari has impacted your creative process.
Yeah, sure. So my studio is my happy place. I'm sitting here on my side of the studio, and then my wife, Kari Kristensen, is on her side of the studio doing her thing. We kind of both have headphones in, and our little dog is somewhere in the middle, sleeping on one of her 3 beds. So that's kind of what every day looks like. And Kari and I spend a lot of time talking, thinking, and breathing art, obviously. So it maybe was only a matter of time until we collaborated. So aside from being my handsome wife and an amazing cook, Kari's a printmaker and a muralist. So people have probably seen her work. It's going to be her 13th, lucky number 13, culture crawl this year, and she's painted over 35 murals around Vancouver. So the jumping off point for our first collaboration was the title of Night Meadow. So it began like all of our pieces with a discussion and then drawings, and then like most things, it was finished because of a deadline. We wanted to make this piece specifically for Pigeon Restaurant's 10-year anniversary celebration. So we just kind of went for it. So Kari printed an edition of 2 and then gave it to me to then respond to. And that's something that I really enjoy about collaborations. It's that call and response, and it's like a little bit of a dance and an experimentation. So since then, we've created a number of pieces and even had a collaborative theme show at New Leaf Editions on Granville Island earlier this year. And then our largest collaborative piece titled A Clearing. So that one measured 36 by 36 inches, and it was commissioned for the Gift of Time Gala supporting Canuck Place, which happened just last weekend. So these are some process shots of both of us working on our different parts of the piece. So printmaking involves very separate and distinct processes: carving the linoleum, inking and printing it, and Kari's etching press, which you can meet at the crawl if you come and visit. It's her pride and joy. It exerts thousands of pounds of pressure onto the paper and the plate, and then comes out with a perfect print. Well, at least if you're Kari, almost every time it comes out perfect. And so printmakers have size constraints because it depends on the size of their bed. So she had to piece 2 prints together to create this work, which was a challenge indeed, but it wasn't my problem, it was her problem. But then it became time for my part. So I'm not limited by size. I just need to be able to frame the work to protect it. But my biggest challenge is the same one that I always have, which is, are there enough flowers and leaves? So because the design had already been drawn, I was able to see the area I need to fill. And then it was just a matter of making and then carefully gluing down all of the pieces. So the paper that we use is one of the main threads that weaves together our work. We both use Arnhem 1618, and that's paper. It's typically a printmaking paper that's been produced in the Netherlands since 1618. And it's just got qualities that are perfect for printmaking, but also for my paper sculpture. And using Kari scraps of paper actually was the beginning of me creating the work I do, funnily enough. And so, yeah, one of those big concerns when bringing our work together was, how can that work together? Will it just look slapped and thrown together, or will it actually work? So I feel like, you know, there are sometimes those things that shouldn't go together, but they do, like peanut butter and jelly, or like Snoop Dogg, Martha Stewart, and then me and Kari. So that's kind of how that work together.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like from an outsider perspective that there is like such harmony between your works, but they are so contrasting. They are so different. Do you have a secret sauce? Like, how did you work together to find that harmony in your work?
Yeah, I think it can be a little bit of a challenge because we're both, our work may, it's just, it seems like maybe it would work, but maybe it won't, because they're very different. They have different kind of energies, even though we have a lot of similarities. Like, we both depict the natural world. We both use intricate cuts and all of those things, but it's, I don't know. I guess it's kind of like our personalities. Maybe you'd think they wouldn't go together, but they do. So I don't know. Luckily, it worked out.
It worked out. Yeah, well, it's beautiful work. And again, just does feel so harmonious whenever I've looked at it. So I'm so impressed by that. Hope, you've recently taken up woodworking.
Yeah.
Very different than glass. One would think from looking afar. How have you found experimenting with woodworking compared to glass? How has that impacted the way you approach glass or your general creative process?
Well, I think the biggest impact is starting very similar to what you were saying earlier about learning something brand new, sort of coming in and being part of a medium that I have no history with. So I come in and I feel like, all right, I'm a learner. I'm starting from the beginning again. And that, feels really good. But like what Tristesse was saying about learning weaving is the same way kind of I came into woodworking. So I didn't know anything except I wanted to play with wood because I felt like wood and glass work nicely together. People feel like wood doesn't move, but it does. It's constantly moving. Glass is moving. They don't move the same way, but they definitely move. Yeah. So I learned how to do joinery, and I spent a lot of time. I got a grant, and I got another award, a bursary, and with that money, I paid for the classes, which are fantastically in the Murgatroyd building, right already where I was. So I learned how to do basic joinery first. I started just, what does wood do? What does wood not do? What does it feel like in your hand? What's its logic? And that's something I'm still learning. Like, I'm still almost a year in, I think very much at the beginning of what will ultimately be a journey of trying to understand wood better. But I progressed from making simple pieces of furniture to, as you can see here on the right, the first piece that actually incorporated a piece of glass just to see what would happen. And in this, we dropped a large glass roundel into a tabletop. And that was a lot harder to do than it looked. Like, there was a lot of cutting and multiple cuts with routers and trying to figure out the way to get it to sit, because it's not perfectly round. And wood is less forgiving than glass in many ways, and in other ways much more. With wood, you can make a mistake and put it down, come back the next day when you're not feeling frustrated or tired, and try and fix it. With glass, once you start, you're with it until it either breaks or it's done. There is no pausing to go get a cup of coffee or catch your breath. You have to just keep moving. And wood is more forgiving in that way. You can put it down and come back to it. And glass is more forgiving in that you can heat it up and the whole thing will move, right? And that's not true with wood. You can steam it and it'll bend, but you know, that's still not quite in the same wheelhouse. So I learned how to make some basic furniture. I learned how to make frames for my own stained glass pieces, as you can see here. And that's been really fun to do. What I'm doing now is I'm actually taking fused panels and I'm designing a piece for the first time. The pieces that I've already made, the stool that you saw a piece of, and the bench and the table and these frames, they were made from somebody else's plans. And for the first time, I'm making my own design. So I created my own set of plans. And then I created a mock-up of those plans and realized how much I hadn't thought about in terms of making wood, right? Like making a cabinet. I'm like, oh, I didn't think about that. I didn't think about that. I didn't think about that. And then remake the plans. And now, you know, I've got 4 fused glass panels that are actually made from broken pieces of glass from other projects. Like I did a show I did 3 years ago. I had to make a piece twice because the first time it didn't work right and it cracked. So I took a hammer to it and broke it into a bunch of pieces. And then I had a couple of other pieces that were sitting around, broke them into pieces, and now made them into fused panels that are going to go into this, what is going to ultimately be a cabinet with doors. And it's been really interesting in part because what's happening next is I'm going to start doing weird stuff with the wood. And I'm already freaking out the woodworking teacher. I'm like, I want this to happen. He's like, but that doesn't work. I was like, that's not the point. It has to look impossible. Like when you look at it, you have to be like, that shouldn't be happening. And his whole response is, wood doesn't break that way, or wood doesn't go that way. Like, well, I want a frame that looks like it's melting. He's like, well, frames don't melt. I'm like, that's not the point. So we have these very difficult conversations. He's amazing, but he's very practically minded. And I'm like, no, I want it to look like it's doing something it shouldn't be able to do. And he was like, why? And so we have those conversations a lot. I want to give him a lot of headaches. But I think I very much feel like the natural presence of wood and the softness of wood, along with the sort of ever molten but always breakable properties of glass, there's something about it that makes to me a very beautiful visual and emotional harmony. And so I'm still like, I'm not where Tristesse is yet. I haven't made a body of work that combines both of these processes yet, but by this time next year I will have.
I love what you said about impossible projects or like impossible ideas. Because I think that is such a beautiful thing of when you venture into collaborations with someone else who's doing a different type of work, or you take up something like weaving or woodworking. I think you think about it differently than someone who's been doing it for a number of years. I think sometimes bringing another mindset, you go, no, that isn't just because it was done that way previously doesn't mean I can't approach it this new way. And people might look at you like, okay, Hope steps in the room. Oh, all the woodworkers like, oh no.
He already does it. I come in a room and he goes,
but I think that really opens us up too. Like we get so much interesting work when we can experiment. And I think that's so fun. And I love how each of you has taken on this collaboration or experimentation with a new medium as a sort of challenge of doing something new, shaking it up, getting creative. I think challenging ourselves to do that is a really exciting thing with creating work. So I love this idea of impossible art. I feel like it's going to keep coming up, and it's just a really fun thing. Tristesse, I know we talked a little bit about in the last question about your creative process and painting and how it's evolved with weaving, but maybe you could go a little bit deeper into that. How would you say you've recently, started combining 2 very distinct artistic practices, weaving and painting? How do you find experimenting with bringing these 2 things together has impacted your creative process?
Well, as you were talking, I just want to show you something.
Oh, please.
So I have,
Show and tell.
this is one of the first things I did as a practice. So I was trying to figure out how to put the paint down on this weaving piece I did in Joshua Tree. And my mother-in-law, Sandra, looked at this, and I'd misthreaded the white, blue. So you get these kind of patterns that are irregular. But as a painter, I was like, oh, I love those. Like, I really love those. I'm going to be able to use those later. And as a traditional weaving, weaver, my mother-in-law was like, oh, that's not gonna, like, that wasn't correct, right?
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
but, and I love correct, this is a really easy weave pattern, but I saw it with the eyes of somebody who was thinking about where it was going to go in terms of painting, and I just found that kind of dialogue between the two of us super interesting. And I was like, no, I kind of like it. Like, and she's kind of like, okay, so it made
If
me really
that's what
think of
you
that.
say. Yeah.
But I think, one thing I think is very important for me is just that, when you delved really heavily into one area of an artistic practice, everything that you learn from that deep inquiry then transfers to whatever the next thing will be. And there's this kind of like beautiful, I think, discussion between the works as they move along. So for me, I started with collage, using maps and geometry, which led to geometric abstraction with all geometries, really exact geometries that were working with the shapes of the collages I'd been doing. And that led to painting a big mural. So I went, my first mural was 200 feet by 25 feet. It was huge. And then that led me to experiment with painting a bit more, and I started getting more, and like with this piece, you can see this is like a lot more sort of gestural. So I went from geometry to very gestural. And then I've been working sort of like that for a while. And then I kind of see that this piece is a big map collage that I did at Emily Carr. So this is collage map pieces from the Geological Survey of Canada. And we just collaged it right onto a wall in there. But I got to a point like a year ago where I didn't really have anything on the books in terms of a big project. I didn't have a mural or a show. I just finished a solo show. And I had time to delve deeply into this really challenging new form. So time was a really big factor in being able to make this change, and giving myself the space and kind of jumping into something that was like, I don't know if I was gonna be any good at this, and but one of the things that I really learned, and how it's really, I think, affected my creative practice just so far. So it's been very new, like this is all really new, but just, I mean, I've always been very influenced by color interactions. And so one great realization I've had is just how understanding color theory in one medium changes and translates into another. So, and like, I'm just so into how, you can take two colors with weaving. I'll show you again. Like here, I don't know if it will translate, but right here you have this white and a green, and over here you have blue and pink, and the kind of pixelated sort of texture and energy of that is just, I just am like very into it. I think most artists feel about color like that they kind of get seduced by it, and so I'm really enjoying that translation of one medium to another medium. So like I get the same sort of feeling by mixing paint and trying to get the right colors. And then this is just so enjoyable. And then I get to combine the two. So I don't know, like up here, or no. Oh, the one over here, I don't know if you guys can see it. There's like a swoop of paint that comes through and then it hits the weaving. And I'm really trying to work those relationships so that the paint is talking to the weaving with color. So yeah, the color interactions I've been really enjoying, and that's I think that's really pushing my understanding of color into a new realm. So you know, with color, it's like an endless area that I think we will always, you know, you're never not gonna be learning about that. And then the one thing I really have enjoyed about this process is because it's quite layered, I have to think about what I'm putting. You have to think about what you're putting on your warp, which is the threads that run this way on the loom. You have to think about the colors that are coming through. And I've been using a technique called clasp weft, which is bringing a color through and grabbing another color and then dropping it down. And then bringing that off the loom and bringing it into the studio and deciding what I'm going to do. So I really am thinking about layering. Like, what do I want this to look like at the end? And what is it going to be looking like, you know, as I start to do it? I use digital tools a lot right now to help me visualize what that's going to be like. So, because it's a high stakes game, like,
Yeah.
you know, it's a high stakes
Very
game.
good way of putting it.
If
Yeah.
I've spent 50 hours on this piece of cloth, that's my canvas. It's not like I can just roll it up happily and start the next one if I screw it up. It's really like a tragedy. So the first few, actually, I have this one. I'll show you this one. So this one was like kind of a start too, where I just took a piece of weaving and then treated it so that I could paint on it. And you know, like just understanding how is with this particular thread, which is, this is cotton, the other ones are cotton, but with this thread, how is it going to absorb the medium? Like, it's different than canvas because it's not as tightly woven as canvas is. So there's been a lot of like just practical details about learning this. So yeah, just working with the layers and the kind of steps that I'm taking, they're a little deeper and they really take a little bit more time. And yeah, so mostly this experimentation just adds more tools to my toolkit, you know, and I think that makes me more versatile as an artist. And I, you know, broadly speaking, all tools will influence my future work, I think. And sometimes we can't see that which way these things are going to influence your work, but you know, maybe in a year from now, something will spark in me because of something I'm learning right now, and I'm kind of trying to have faith in that process.
Amazing. Thank you, Tristesse. I really like what you said about it can sometimes be a high stakes game. I think that nicely leads me to my next question, which is, you know, experimenting and collaborating with other people. These things often come with difficulties. They come with challenges. And almost always, I think something I mentioned earlier and we chatted briefly about was that, you know, you only see the end result of these projects often. And there's many hours, many colorful words, many missteps before you get to success. Like here it is. I feel this one. This one is what I was going for. So I would like to chat a little bit about the challenges maybe you have faced along the way. Tara, starting with you, like, did you face any challenges in collaborating with Kari on this series?
He's like, no, nothing, not one.
Not one.
No matter what I do,
it was smooth sailing.
Yeah, I would say the biggest challenge is to do with balance. So both balancing personalities, but then balance just as a principle of design. So collaborations can be, you know, a little tricky, but exhilarating, and you've got to invite somebody else into your practice. You have to hear their voice when you work. luckily that wasn't too too tricky, and came pretty naturally. In fact, you can speak a little more bluntly with your spouse, and there's no need to do that delicate dance of polite feedback that you are often expected to do in life. So there would be times where I would just sort of say, no, that's just too much of you, that doesn't work. Or Kari at one point said, oh no, that just looks bad. But you know, whatever, it's not personal, and it's kind of, you can laugh about it later. And the juxtaposition in our styles is quite severe, or could be quite severe, and can create a bit of a challenge when thinking about the way that visual aspects and elements are going to be distributed within a piece. So those slides that we're seeing here are a study that Kari and I created for the clearing. Kari always creates studies before beginning her larger works, and this was a really essential step for us when creating the clearing. It just is a great problem-solving device, because you need to be able to see in advance where things can go wrong. So the final piece ended up looking quite different to this one. And you know, neither of our mediums really allow for any adjustments or tweaks at the end of a piece. It has to be very much thought through and planned out. So if we hadn't made this little 8x8 study, the final piece, I don't think would have been as successful, because when looking at that study, you can see the first thing that we're all thinking is there is just not enough Tara. And then the second thing is it's just way too dark. So we wanted the work to be a celebration of the exquisite beauty of nature, and have a lot of overlapping layers and angles. And we wanted it to really depict the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel, the clearing, and, you know, a light-filled starry sky, which this study isn't quite doing. So it had to change, and it did. And because we created the study, we could just easily see issues well in advance, rather than spending, you know, the endless hours to complete the piece. And it could then be completely balanced. We could both have our work be the star of the show, and also make a light, starry, clearing, beautiful piece. So it's not something I actually normally do in my work, create studies. Making something smaller, it doesn't make it easier for me. It makes it harder, because I have to make more detail and things like that. So I normally just do drawings to plan ahead, but it was extremely useful in this instance to do a study. So yeah.
It sounds like you both did a good job at minimizing the risk that we were just talking about by scaling it down. And of course, direct communication always does make life easier in all facets, I would say.
Yeah.
Overall. Hope, you kind of touched on it a little bit before when you were talking about, I think it was specifically the table with the glass circular piece. That was a real challenge. I'm wondering if you could share for us, what was the challenge of learning woodworking and even of combining glass with wood for the first time?
Well, in that particular piece, the big challenge was that the roundel that I made in the hot shop was not perfectly round. And I could have made it perfectly round by cutting it to be perfectly round, but that would have taken away sort of any kind of organic feel to it at all. So the challenge was, cutting a perfect circle is easy, cutting an imperfect circle is not. And so we ended up sort of appealing to the guys who run the model making shop in the Murgatroyd building to do a negative cut from an Illustrator file I made of the exact tracing of the shape of the roundel. And then we had to, you know, cut into the top of the table twice. The first time to get a shelf to sit the piece on when it dropped in, and the second time to cut it down so it would go in. So it actually had to like look like that inside. And so that took 2 weeks of going back and forth and, you know, trying to get it perfect. It was off by a millimeter at one point, like we had to do it twice. And there were just a number of things about that made it complicated. And I think why I like the idea of having wood with glass is because of that not perfection kind of feeling of things. And so I think, you know, the takeaway from that was you need somebody with a CNC router who's just going to cut the exact shape that you need. So you just drop it right in. And that's going to be the next time we try and do something like that. I try and do something like that. That's probably what I'll do. And I think, you know, I was in a position of being a student and not a partner with the person that I was working with. And so their approach to me was, all right, we're going to do this. It's going to be weird, but off we go. You know, it's what you're here for. So he was very helpful. He was very patient. He was, and really like trying to figure out the best way to get the end result that we were after. Oh, these are rondelles. One of the things I've been doing as I work towards what will ultimately be a body of work that combines glass and wood, some of the pieces, not all of them, are wall pieces. And they rely on these round pieces that will end up sort of layering, and some of them will move and some of them won't. Some of them will move along wood, some of them will stay still, some of them will look like they're moving, but they're not. And so I started making roundels as a way to test color processes. And then I was like, well, what do I do with the roundels? I'll make clocks out of them. And so I've been using all of my color experiments, and that's a photosensitive one on the right and a multi-striped one made from a stack of cut glass rings on the left. And I, you know, put a clockworks in them and I hang them on the wall and I sell them with the culture crawl. And it's really helpful because it allows me to perfect this process of getting multiple stripes in here this way, which has like 17 steps to it, which would be too boring for non-glass people to have to sit through. But it also allows me to combine colors and decide how I like the way colors play together, what colors I do or don't like, different patterns that work or don't work. And again, you know, and this is one of the fused panel pieces that I've been working on that came from broken pieces of other things, where and this is actually a portrait of Harvey Milk, who's a major queer pioneer and was killed in the 1970s in San Francisco. And this was an attempt to try and figure out how I could play with broken pieces of glass and imagery. But I, you know, all of these experiments are leading me towards, you know, what will ultimately be, you know, a whole series of both 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional sculptural pieces that will use both wood and glass. And so each time there's this feeling of like I'm inventing a thing, but I'm not. I'm just doing a thing that isn't commonly done. So I'm constantly having to try and find people who are also doing it, or people who at least understand what I'm trying to do so that they can help me get where I'm going. And the woodworking has been, you know, the student aspect of woodworking has been very helpful with that. But I think as time progresses, I'm going to have to push harder to sort of, as I said, I'm starting to drive my woodworking teacher a little insane. So I think I'm going to be driving him more insane. And in the end, you know, that's okay. I'm not worried about that, but it's going to be harder to sort of explain. I'm trying to make it, I'm going to have to draw more and explain more and, you know, and learn more before I can fully create stuff. But each thing comes with its own particular challenge. And so you have to sort of, when I taught graphic design, which I did for a really long time, I taught Photoshop, I taught Illustrator, I taught software as well as theory. And one of the things I would tell people when I taught software like Photoshop or Illustrator was knowing this software is not knowing how to do anything immediately. It's like you imagine knowing this software is, you ask me to do something, I go boom, and I can just do it. And the reality is everything you do in Photoshop or Illustrator is individual. It's its own thing. It's a separate project. It's a separate requirement. It's a separate need. And you have to figure out how to do it each time. And the only thing that changes over time is how big the window of time is that you need to figure it out. You don't ever become someone who can just throw up things Photoshop or Illustrator can do. You become someone who can figure out how to do something very quickly. But you still have to go through the figuring out. You just can, as you get better, you do it faster, but you never, almost never, can just turn around and be like, this thing I've never done before. I know exactly which levers to push or pull. It's like you have to play and you have to figure it out. And the window of figuring out gets smaller as you get better at it. It doesn't disappear, it just gets smaller. And that's like right now, my window for woodworking is like this big, and I'd like to get it sort of down to here. And that's my challenge.
Right. Sounds like mentorship and collaboration has been a big part of that.
It is, and at the same time, it's like a little bit of like, it's frustrating because you're constantly, when you switch mediums, you also switch attitudes, right? So that when a potter doesn't think the same way as a glassblower doesn't think the same way as a painter doesn't think the same way as a carpenter or a woodworker. And so you're trying to, there's like a grinding of gears that comes from trying to get those things to work together sometimes.
Definitely. Tristesse, I haven't heard from you yet, but I did get some kind of hints as to what these challenges for you might have been. 50 hours weaving, all the techniques that you had to learn. Could you share with us a little bit about a specific challenge you might have faced when you were combining weaving and painting together?
Yeah, I'll try to be quick, but yeah, so with weaving there was lots of challenges, and mostly I think as an adult who's got responsibilities, like having the patience and time to allow myself to learn this. And I just have circumstances where I have a master weaver in my family, and she has been so generous with her knowledge. So I made a lot of mistakes, and I think patience is so important. I would make mistakes with the threading of the loom, and then have to go back and rethread it, and then do it again, and then I make another mistake just because I'm zoning out. So I really had to learn how to be weaving is methodical and meditative in a different way than, say, something I've done before, like collage or something, but like finding that zone and getting into it, and giving myself some time to make mistakes. So having the artist residency in my future motivated me a great deal to keep going. And my lovely Sandra Compton kept on encouraging me. So that was really, I was very lucky. But I think the best way to overcome challenges is really to have like an accountability buddy or a collaborator when trying something really challenging, and a deadline. So for me, I had the deadline far enough down the road, and I know myself enough to know like that I could do it, but it was giving me enough time to make some mistakes but take it on, and then really like committing to it, because there was times when I was like I hate this, just because I would make a mistake and it would take me a lot of time to like go back in and figure it out, or or just like undo my mistake. So yeah, I think it's really important that you recognize that you're going to be a beginner again. And there's kind of a horror and a joy in that. Because being a beginner,
that's extremely well put.
Yeah, like being a beginner is cool and all, but you just keep telling yourself that when you make all types of shitty work. And then just again, that these skills, really committing to your own growth. I think as a teacher, I ask my students to be like, hey, you don't know why you might want this or need this, you know, but you probably will down the line. So trust that this, like, all learning applies to everything else in your life. You know, art is everything and everything is art as far as I'm concerned. And I think, you know, it's really important to be curious, and I kind of put myself in the same position that I asked my students to be in. So it was hard. Like, I'm not gonna lie, like, it was super hard, but I'm so happy I've tried this, and I'm like, there's so many other things I want to try. So it's really been beneficial to me. The challenges have been real, and it's also worth it. But you have to, there's, you know, there's like, if you train for a marathon, it's the same sort of thing. Like, you're going to be, you know, there's going to be days where it's raining and you've got a sore Achilles heel or whatever. And you know, like, you know, you're just going to hate it and think it's the stupidest idea that you've ever had. And then, you know, it's like getting to cross that finish line. It's like pretty awesome. So be courageous.
Be courageous. I love that message. I think that, you know, all of you have taken such risks, and you've also shown how much taking that risk is worth it. Taking that leap of faith is worth it, not only for the end result, but also for all these interesting things you learn through the process of taking that risks, even if in the moment maybe they don't feel so great. When you look back at it later, you can see just how important that was for you, or how rewarding that was for you. I'm just taking a look at our chat. I don't see any questions at this time. So I'm going to wrap up today's discussion. So thank you all for coming out this evening and tuning in online for this series of Talking Art. You can come see all these lovely artists in their studios for the Culture Crawl from November 14th to 17th. So make sure to go to our website at culturecrawl.ca/artists and find their profiles and find their studio numbers. Maybe they can plug them quickly, and go say hello. Go say hello to them and ask them a little bit about these projects. I'm sure you might have your own burning questions. Tomorrow, we're going to have our third and final series of Talking Art, which is going to be world building and storytelling through visual art. You can join us again online at 7 p.m. You can check out the Talking Art event page on our website for all the details. With that, maybe I'll get you all to just quickly plug if you have your studio space in your building, if anyone wants to come see you before we say goodbye. Hope, maybe you first.
Sure. I'll be at Terminal City Glass Co-op in the Murgatroyd building. There'll be live glass blowing demonstrations going on all weekend, and 12 of our co-op members, myself included, will be in our glass blowing co-op with all of our stuff all over the place. And it'll be great. It'll be fun. And more of our members are upstairs in the Murgatroyd building as well.
Fantastic. Tara?
Yes, so I'm in a new studio on the 3rd floor, so number 334 at 1000 Parker Street Studios.
Thanks.
Awesome.
I'm at the Arts Factory. There's 21 other artists at the Arts Factory, and we're at 281 Industrial. And yeah, it's going to be great. I think there's going to be a lot of energy and really cool work to see, and I hope to see you all out there.
Okay, well, fantastic. Well, thank you all to our artists, and thank you all for coming out this evening, and we hope to see you at the Culture Crawl.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
See you.
Thanks.
Bye.